Jessa Calloway was gripping the edge of the park bench like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. Her vision blurred. Her chest was tight. The sun was too bright. The laughter of kids playing across the path rang in her ears like nails on glass. Her breathing came in short, panicked gasps, and the iced coffee she dropped lay shattered on the pavement, the melting ice mixing with tears she hadn't even realized were falling. She was losing it, right here, in the middle of a public park. And then a voice cut through the fog. Hey, it's okay. You're okay. She blinked. A man knelt in front of her, his hands held up, eyes steady on hers. He had a little boy, maybe 4, clinging to his leg, wide-eyed and quiet. "Can I sit?" the man asked gently, motioning to the bench beside her. She nodded, barely. He eased into the seat, keeping some space, like he knew not to overwhelm her. "Breathe with me, all right, in through your nose." She followed his lead. His voice was calm, deep, nothing like the chaos in her chest. "And out through your mouth." His presence was grounding. The boy tugged lightly at his dad's sleeve, whispering, "Is she sick?" "No, buddy, she's just having a hard moment," the man said softly, never taking his eyes off her. "We all have those, right?" Slowly, her breathing evened out. The tingling in her fingers faded. Her heartbeat settled. He smiled gentle, not pitying. "There you go." She let out a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to freak out like that." "You don't have to apologize. Panic attacks don't make you weak, they make you human." She stared at him. He looked like he hadn't shaved in a couple days. His jeans had a tear in one knee, and his shirt was faded, but clean. His hands were rough, like he worked with them. The little boy beside him clutched a plastic dinosaur toy and looked up at her like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve. "I'm Jessa," she said, her voice still hoarse. "Xander Voss, and this is my sidekick Mason." Mason waved shyly. "Hi." "Hi, Mason," she whispered, managing the smallest smile. They sat in silence for a minute, just the 3 of them. The chaos of the world moved on around them, but for some reason, she felt like something had shifted. "You okay to sit for a bit?" Xander asked. She nodded. "Yeah, I think so." Mason tugged on his dad's hand. "Can we feed the ducks?" Xander looked at Jessa. "You up for joining us?" She hesitated. She should say no. She had a meeting in an hour. A stupid, pointless meeting about numbers on a spreadsheet. But her limbs still felt like jelly, and this man, this complete stranger, had just helped her breathe when she couldn't remember how. "Yeah," she said, "I'd like that." They walked together, Mason skipping ahead with his bag of bread crusts. Xander stayed close, but didn't crowd her. "You come here often?" he asked. "Not really, I'm usually working." He nodded like he understood more than she'd said. "Rough day." She let out a dry laugh. "Rough month." He didn't press, just handed her a piece of bread for the ducks. She watched Mason giggle as birds flocked around him. It was peaceful, strange, unexpected. They spent almost an hour there. Her phone buzzed in her purse, but she ignored it. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like the walls were closing in. When Mason started yawning, Xander crouched down and scooped him up, cradling him against his shoulder. The kid was out in seconds. "I should let you go," Xander said quietly, "but I'm glad we met Jessa." She hesitated. Can I thank you with coffee or something?" He looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I want to." He studied her for a second, then nodded. "All right, there's this little diner on Maple, nothing fancy." "Perfect," she said, and it was. They exchanged no numbers, no social media handles. They just agreed to meet again. And she did. The next day, and the one after that. She learned he was a single dad, that Mason's mom had left when the boy was 2, that he worked construction jobs, whatever he could find. that he struggled but never let Mason see it. He learned that Jessa was the CEO of a luxury skincare brand, that her company was worth over $20 million, that she lived in a penthouse and had staff and assistants and an entire life that felt like someone else's sometimes. But he never treated her differently, never acted impressed, never tried to impress her. He just listened. And every time they met, she felt a little less broken. One night, 2 weeks after that first park bench moment, they walked under the city lights. Mason had fallen asleep on Xander's shoulder again after dinner, and Jessa couldn't stop looking at them. "You're a good dad," she said. He looked at her surprised. "Thanks, I'm just trying my best." "That's everything." They stopped outside her building. She hesitated. "Come up," she said, "just for a bit. You can lay Mason down while we talk." Xander's eyes searched hers. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure." Inside, Mason curled up on one of the guest bedroom beds like he belonged there. Xander stood awkwardly in her living room, clearly stunned by the floor-to-ceiling windows and marble floors. "You weren't kidding," he muttered. "You're kind of a big deal." She laughed, still scared of ducks, though. That made him grin. They sat on the couch, closer than they'd ever been. The air between them shifted. "Jessa," he said, voice low, "I don't know what this is, but I feel like I've known you forever." She looked at him, heart pounding. "Feel like I can finally breathe when I'm with you." He reached out, fingers brushing hers. "I don't have money. I don't have much of anything, really, but I'd give you everything I've got." She leaned in, her forehead against his. "You already did." And then finally he kissed her. It wasn't flashy or perfect. It was warm and real, and everything she hadn't known she needed. That night, Jessa Calloway fell asleep with her head on Xander Voss's shoulder, and his son curled up just down the hall. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. And she couldn't wait to see what came next. Jessa pressed the elevator button with her thumb, her other hand still tingling from where Xander had held it the night before. As the lift descended, she stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls, tailored cream blazer, gold hoops, and soft waves falling over her shoulders. Not a single hair out of place. And yet, beneath the polished surface, her heart beat with a quiet, unfamiliar rhythm. The elevator doors slid open to the familiar hum of her office floor. Her assistant, Daria, was already waiting, tablet in hand. "Boardroom in 5. They're expecting projections on the Milan expansion. You good?" "Yeah," Jessa said. Then, after a pause, "Actually, can you push the Milan deck to this afternoon? I need to update the margin estimates." Daria blinked. "Of course. Do you want me to reschedule your lunch with Anna from Prosper?" "No, keep it, but let's move it to the cafe downstairs, something less formal." As she walked past the rows of glass offices, she caught her reflection again in the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked the same, but something had shifted. She could feel it in the way she moved, in the way she didn't reach for her phone every 2 seconds to check for emails. She hadn't even opened her laptop this morning until after breakfast. A real one, with eggs, cooked by someone else. 3 hours later, she was halfway through an oat latte when Anna leaned across the cafe table and arched a brow. "You're smiling." Jessa blinked. "I'm what?" "Smiling, like genuinely. Did you close that Paris licensing deal, or did someone finally invent calorie-free tiramisu?" Jessa stirred her spoon through the foam. "Neither, just life." Anna tilted her head, studying her. "This about the guy." "What guy?" "The one you met 2 weeks ago. You haven't mentioned him, which tells me everything." Jessa hesitated, then leaned in. "He's different." Different like he owns a vineyard in Tuscany, or different like he drives a beat-up pickup and wears flannel. "Second one." Anna's eyes widened. And you're still seeing him. Jessa nodded, smiling into her cup. Every day. Anna sat back. You're serious? I am. There was a beat of silence, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine behind them. Are you happy? Anna asked. Jessa didn't answer right away. Her mind went to the way Mason had curled against her side that morning, still half asleep, while Xander packed a lunch of crackers and carrot sticks for the daycare. The way Xander had kissed her temple and whispered, "Text me when you're done saving the world." Yeah, she said finally, I think I am. That night, Jessa stood in the kitchen of Xander's cozy walk-up, watching as Mason tried to explain the rules of a game he'd made up using 2 mismatched action figures and a half-deflated beach ball. Xander leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with a quiet intensity. You're good with him, he said. She looked up. He makes it easy. I don't know about that. He duct-taped my house keys to the ceiling fan last week. She laughed. He's creative. Xander's gaze softened. So are you, just in a different way. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the counter. I had a meeting this morning with a woman I used to try to impress. Today, I didn't care what she thought. I wanted to be somewhere else. Where? Here. He watched her carefully, like he was waiting for the punchline. I know this is messy, she said, voice low. I know our lives aren't exactly compatible. Jessa. No, let me say it. I don't care that your truck stalls at red lights or that your kid eats cereal for dinner. I don't care that you don't know the difference between a serum and an emulsion. I care that you remember how I take my coffee and that you keep Band-Aids in your wallet because Mason always scrapes his knee on Tuesdays. He reached for her hand, told you it didn't have much to offer. She shook her head. You were wrong, you offer everything that matters. The next week passed in a blur of quiet mornings, whispered jokes during bedtime stories, and long, drowsy evenings tangled up on the couch. Mason had started leaving one of his toy cars in her purse every time she left, so you don't forget to come back. She never did. But the world beyond those walls continued. Her company's European distributor threatened to pull out of their spring launch unless she flew to Zurich. A potential investor from Singapore wanted a private tour of the lab, and the PR team was pushing for a gala appearance she'd postponed twice already. And then came the email. From her board chair. Subject, urgent, conflict of interest review. Her stomach dropped as she read the attached memo. Her relationship with Xander had been flagged. Someone had leaked details: his employment status, her financial influence, potential legal exposure. The language was clinical, ruthless. She sat frozen at her desk, the city lights blinking beyond the glass. Her phone buzzed. A photo from Xander. Mason asleep in a blanket fort, thumb in his mouth, T-Rex clutched in one hand. Below it, he said the fort's missing its queen. Her chest ached. She could fix this. She always fixed things. But this wasn't a supply chain issue or a delayed shipment. This was her life unraveling at the seams. She grabbed her coat and left the building without a word. By the time she reached his place, it was nearly midnight. She knocked softly, praying Mason was asleep. Xander opened the door in sweatpants and a faded hoodie, barefoot, and blinking against the hallway light. Jessa. Can we talk? He stepped aside. She walked in, folding her arms tightly across her chest. There's something I didn't tell you about my company. He nodded slowly. Okay. They found out about us. The board, they think you're a liability. His jaw tightened. Because I'm not rich. Because you're not me. He took a breath. And what do you think? I think I've spent my entire life trying to impress people who wouldn't notice if I disappeared. And now, I'm terrified of losing the only thing that ever made me feel like I wasn't alone anymore. He stared at her. Are you asking me to walk away? No, I'm asking you to fight with me, even if it gets ugly. Xander closed the distance between them, his voice low. It's already ugly, but I'm not going anywhere. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. They're going to try to tear this apart. Then we hold tighter. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. Because for the first time, she wasn't the one doing the saving. She was choosing to be saved, too. Jessa stood at the edge of the rooftop, the wind tugging at the hem of her coat as the city shimmered below, endless and indifferent. Behind her, the door to the penthouse garden clicked shut as Xander stepped out, his expression unreadable. She hadn't seen him in 3 days, not since the board meeting that had turned from tense to brutal in under 15 minutes. She didn't turn around. They want me to make a statement, she said quietly. Clarify that the relationship was personal and separate from the business, that it's over. Xander's footsteps were slow, deliberate on the stone. And is it? She looked down at her hands, told them no. He stopped a few feet away, his jaw tight. You told them the truth. I told them that I'm not going to be managed like a line item on a budget report. His voice was low, and what did they say? She turned to face him. They gave me 72 hours to reconsider, or they'll call for a vote to remove me as CEO. Xander stared at her. They'd really do that. They've been waiting for an excuse, gave them one. He walked past her, stopping at the railing. You're risking everything. I know. He didn't look at her. Why? Because I've spent too long choosing what looked right over what felt right. I'm done. He finally turned to her. What happens if they go through with it? I lose my title, my shares stay, my influence fades. And Mason. She blinked. What do you mean? My son comes with me, everywhere. Whatever you're walking into, he's part of it. Jessa stepped closer. There's no version of this where don't want both of you in my life. He studied her. Even if you're forced out of your company, if the press turns on you, if everything you've built starts to crumble. She met his gaze. Then I'll rebuild, with my own hands if I have to. Xander exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I've never wanted to be someone's complication. You're not, you're my clarity. He shook his head. You know what I see when I look at you? Restraint. Control. You've got a fortress built around you, and I'm the guy with muddy boots asking to come in. You already did, she said, and I haven't been the same since. He stared at her for a long moment, then stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his neck, breathing him in, grounding herself in the weight of him. We'll figure it out, he said. I know. The next morning, the tabloids filled with whispers. Photos of her, grainy and distant, leaving his building. Headlines speculating about the man without a last name. The PR department called nonstop, but Jessa didn't answer. She was in her apartment, helping Mason rearrange his toy bins into categories he insisted were scientific. That afternoon, she walked into the boardroom without notes, without slides, and without apology. The atmosphere was stiff, the air sharpened by expectation. I'm not resigning, she said before anyone could speak. You can vote, you can posture, but I will not pretend that being in love makes me unfit to lead. An older man at the end of the table folded his hands. You've put this company at risk. No, she said, steady. You're just afraid that someone who feels deeply can still run a multi-million-dollar empire. A younger board member, the newest, cleared her throat. What exactly are you asking us to believe, Jessa? That I'm still the woman who turned a one-product brand into a global name. That I'm in love with someone who doesn't care about my net worth or my press coverage. And that I will not sacrifice that for your comfort." The room went quiet. The vote was scheduled for 48 hours later. And in that time, she was expected to sit still, smile for cameras, and pretend she wasn't watching her legacy teeter on the edge of dismantling. But instead of hiding, she went with Xander and Mason to a street fair on the west side. They ate fried dough with powdered sugar and watched a magician who wasn't very good. She taught Mason how to win at ring toss and let him convince her to wear a balloon crown on her head. That night, Xander pulled her aside as Mason colored on the floor. "You look lighter," he said. "I feel it." "I've been thinking," Xander said, "about what we're walking into. If they vote against you, what then?" She leaned against the kitchen counter. "Then I build something else, something we choose together." He hesitated. "I've never asked you for anything." She tilted her head. "Ask." "I don't want to be your escape or your rebellion. I want to be your anchor." She stepped forward and took his hand. "You already are." The day of the vote, she walked into the boardroom in navy slacks and a simple blouse. No jewelry, no entourage, just herself. The votes were cast in silence. When the final count came in, the chair cleared his throat. "You retain your position, for now." She nodded once. "Good." As she left the room, her phone rang. It was Xander. "Come to the roof," he said. She stepped out of the elevator 10 minutes later, breath catching at the sight before her. Twinkle lights looped across the railing. A small table set for two. Mason in a button-down shirt, holding a bouquet of sunflowers that dwarfed him. When she reached him, he grinned and handed them over. "Dad says this is your favorite kind." Jessa knelt and kissed his cheek. "They are." Xander stepped forward, wearing a dark button-down, sleeves rolled, hair still damp from a recent shower. He looked nervous, but those eyes were steady. He took her hands. "I don't have a ring, I don't have a speech, but I have this." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A drawing. Mason's, clearly. Crayons and chaos. It was a picture of the three of them holding hands in front of a crooked house with a heart instead of a chimney. "I want this," Xander said. "I want you. I want him. I want late nights and early mornings and every boring, beautiful moment in between." Jessa blinked back tears. "Are you asking me?" "I'm telling you," he said. "I'm ready if you are." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Mason clapped, already running back inside to find more flowers. Xander pulled her close, kissing her like she was the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask. And that night, while the city buzzed below them and the moon bathed the rooftop in silver, Jessa Calloway said yes to a life that didn't come wrapped in luxury, but came with everything that mattered. Rain streaked the windows of the small venue tucked between two brownstones on the Lower East Side. Inside, soft music played from hidden speakers overhead, the scent of cedar and roses drifting through the air. Rows of candles flickered along the aisle, casting golden light across the polished wood floors. Jessa adjusted the collar of her ivory jacket, glancing at the mirror in the dressing room. Her reflection looked calm, but her fingers trembled slightly as she fastened the simple gold clasp at her wrist. She didn't need a stylist, a press release, or a feature spread in a glossy magazine. She needed one thing: to step into the next chapter of her life without fear. Daria entered quietly and handed her a folded note. "He wrote this while Mason was coloring. Told me not to let you read it until the last minute." Jessa opened the note slowly, her heart thudding in her chest. It wasn't a letter, just a sentence written in a scrawled hand. "I never thought I'd find someone who made every scar feel like it led to them." She closed her eyes, exhaling through her nose as warmth spread through her chest. She tucked the note into her pocket and gave Daria a small nod. Let's do this. The ceremony was small. No photographers, no press, just a handful of chairs, a smiling officiant, and Mason in a navy vest tugging at his too-tight collar. Xander stood at the end of the aisle, his tie slightly crooked, his hands folded in front of him. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment, everything else, the company, the board, the noise of the world, fell away. As she stepped toward him, Mason leaned toward the officiant and whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's my new mom." Laughter rippled through the room. Jessa's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Not here, not yet. Xander took her hands as she reached him, his grip firm and sure. "You okay?" he asked under his breath. "I've never been more." The officiant began, but Jessa barely heard the words. She was watching the way Xander's thumb moved over her fingers, the way Mason leaned against Daria's leg with one hand tucked under his cheek, the way rain tapped softly against the windows like a heartbeat. "Do you, Jessa Calloway, take?" "I do," she said before the question finished. Xander chuckled under his breath. "And do you, Xander Voss?" "I absolutely do." The officiant smiled, "Then by the power vested in me." Before he could finish, Mason shouted, "Now kiss her." They did. It wasn't perfect. Xander's nose bumped hers. She laughed into his mouth, but it felt like everything she'd waited for. Afterward, they didn't have a ballroom or a plated dinner. Instead, they took a hired car to a little restaurant. Xander loved, one with cracked tile floors and lemon trees in the window. The owner, a man with a white apron and a voice like gravel, hugged Jessa like she was family. They pushed 2 tables together. Mason drew dinosaurs on the paper placemats. Xander fed her a bite of his pasta. She stole his bread when he wasn't looking. Later, as the sun dipped low and the rain stopped, they walked along the sidewalk, hand in hand, Mason skipping ahead in polished shoes. "You sure this is what you want?" Xander asked softly. Jessa looked up at him. "I didn't know what I wanted until I met you." He reached into his coat, pulling out a small velvet pouch. "I was going to wait until later, but..." She opened it slowly. Inside was a charm bracelet, delicate and gold. 3 charms dangled from it, a small house, a heart, and a tiny T-Rex. "For everything we built," he said, "and the reason we built it." She ran her fingers over the charms, her throat tight. "It's perfect." They walked in silence for a while, the city quieter than usual, as if it knew something sacred had happened. At home, Mason fell asleep in the car. Xander carried him inside, cradling him with practiced ease, and laid him gently in his bed. Jessa stood in the doorway, watching as Xander pulled the blanket up and kissed Mason's forehead. When he turned and met her eyes, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Later, curled up in bed with the window cracked open to let in the night air, Jessa traced lazy circles on Xander's chest. "I used to think love was supposed to be fireworks," she murmured. "Explosive, loud, unstoppable." He brushed his fingers through her hair, and now I think it's the quiet after." He kissed her forehead. "I'll be your quiet for as long as you'll have me." She looked up at him, her voice steady. "Forever." Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. A dog barked. Life went on. But inside that small apartment, on that ordinary night, 2 people who never should have met lay side by side, whole, steady, and finally home. The kind of love they'd found didn't need headlines. It didn't need validation or proof. It just needed a bench in a park, a moment of compassion, and the courage to hold on when the world told them to let go. And they never did. Xander tightened his grip on the steering wheel as they turned onto the winding coastal road, the ocean stretching wide and silver beside them. Jessa sat in the passenger seat, bare feet propped up on the dash, her hair pulled into a loose braid. Mason was in the back seat, humming softly to himself, a picture book open on his lap. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the hills, casting golden light across the dashboard. They'd been on the road for nearly 6 hours, headed north toward a small property just outside Mendocino. It wasn't a vacation. It was a beginning. "Is this the place with the big trees?" Mason asked, peeking between the seats. "Redwoods, yeah," Xander said. "Wait until you see how tall they are." Jessa glanced over at him. "You sure about this?" He nodded. "We're not running, we're starting over." The property had belonged to one of Xander's uncles, a man who'd passed years ago and left behind a modest cabin that had stood empty since. It needed work: new plumbing, updated wiring, a roof that didn't leak. But it had something no penthouse or corporate boardroom ever had: quiet, space, a future untouched by expectations. When they arrived, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows through the towering trees. The cabin sat nestled in a clearing, a wraparound porch sagging slightly, wildflowers sprouting between the stone steps. Mason ran ahead, his shoes crunching over gravel. "Do we live here now?" he asked, turning in a slow circle. Xander stepped beside him. "If you want to." The boy studied the trees, the porch, the chipped paint. Then he nodded once. "I do." Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. Jessa ran her fingers along the edge of the fireplace mantel, her eyes moving across the high, beamed ceilings and wide plank floors. "I could get used to this," she said. Xander set down the bags and turned toward her. "I want to build something with you, something that doesn't need signatures or investors or security codes." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You think can handle no Wi-Fi for a while." He raised an eyebrow. "I think you'll survive." That night, they ate sandwiches on the porch under a sky full of stars. Mason fell asleep wrapped in a blanket on a lounge chair, a flashlight still clutched in one hand. Jessa sipped from a mug of tea and looked out at the dark outline of the trees. "I used to think I needed skyscrapers, boardrooms, the rush of it all." Xander rested his hand over hers. "And now? I just want this. You, him, something that doesn't fall apart the second someone questions it." He kissed her knuckles gently. "Then it's ours." They spent the following weeks cleaning, rebuilding, and learning. Xander taught Mason how to use a hammer. Jessa learned how to start a fire without burning her eyebrows off. They spent mornings in the garden, afternoons painting and patching, and evenings curled up with books and board games. One afternoon, Xander found an old workbench in the shed and began restoring it. He didn't say much about it, just worked quietly, smoothing each piece until it shone. Jessa noticed, but didn't ask. A month later, he called her outside, Mason bouncing excitedly behind him. "What's going on?" she asked. Xander stepped aside to reveal the bench, now fully restored, with a plaque nailed to the front. "The Calloway Voss workshop." She stared at the name, her throat tightening. "You said you wanted to build something," he said, "so let's build it together." They turned the space into a small studio. Jessa began crafting handmade skincare items, blending oils and herbs from the garden. Xander built shelves, packaging stations, and a tiny display window out front. Mason made labels with colored pencils and insisted on naming every product after a dinosaur. They started selling at the local farmers market. What began as curiosity turned into loyalty. People returned week after week, drawn to the warmth, the story, the authenticity. One morning, as they packed up the truck for the market, Jessa paused to watch Xander lift a crate into the back. He looked over his shoulder, meeting her eyes. "Something wrong?" "No," she said. "Everything's finally right." Later that night, After the fire had burned low and Mason was asleep in the loft above, Xander pulled Jessa close on the couch. "I never told you," he murmured. "That night in the park, I almost didn't stop. I had groceries. I was tired." She traced a line along his jaw. "But you did." "I did. And it changed everything." He nodded. "I didn't save you, though." "You didn't have to, you stayed. That's what saved me." She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I want to grow old here," she said quietly. "I want to wake up to coffee and sawdust and a kid who still thinks we're superheroes." He kissed her temple. "Then we will." The seasons changed. The garden bloomed, then faded. Snow dusted the trees, and Mason learned to sled on a hill behind the cabin. They built shelves for new products, shipped boxes to nearby towns, and watched their quiet little venture turn into something steady. One spring morning, Xander walked into the kitchen holding a folded newspaper. He set it on the counter in front of Jessa. Her eyes widened. It was a profile piece, her, Xander, Mason, and their workshop. A journalist from a regional lifestyle magazine had visited the market and fallen in love with their story. The headline read, "From penthouse to pine needles, how one family found everything they needed in a cabin." She laughed, shaking her head. "You didn't tell me it was coming out today." "I forgot. Guess I've been a little distracted by a certain brilliant woman who makes lotion smell like heaven." She folded the paper, setting it aside. "I'm just glad we did it our way." He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Always." Years passed. The cabin grew. So did Mason. The business flourished just enough to keep them busy, never too much to steal their lives. They added a greenhouse, a new room above the workshop, and a hammock between two trees where Jessa liked to read. They never returned to the rush. They never needed to. They had a life made of quiet mornings, honest work, and each other. A love not built on declarations or diamonds, but on presence, patience, and the courage to start over. And every year, on the anniversary of that first meeting, they returned to the same park bench. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They just sat. Together. Where it all began.